Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to another episode of Love and Abuse. I hope that if you are going through the holidays right now, when this is being recorded, that you're surviving. You're surviving the holidays, that you're getting through, especially when it comes to family and reunitions or reunions. When you are dealing with family, there's a certain different level of energy exchange, I guess I could say, because family, they know you all your life, pretty much. You know family all their lives, and you know how they are, and they know you all your life, and they think they know who you are. But then some people, they go out and listen to shows like this. They listen to my other show, The Overwhelmed Brain. They listen and read and watch and study and do everything they can to improve themselves. They go through a personal growth process. And when they do that, they shift. I believe you listening to shows like this, you doing everything you can to improve yourself, whether it's self-help or you reach out to counselors, therapists, or even really smart best friends, or even family that can help you through your struggles and your challenges. I believe when you do that, you go through a shift. You have to, because you learn something new. And then you start to question old beliefs and old values and old perceptions. So you look out into the world and you have these old perceptions, and then suddenly you're presented with some new idea, new thought, and you tell yourself, wait, this is what I believed all this time? That's wrong. And one of those things could be, for example, personal boundaries. I've had clients, or I know one in particular, said that he didn't know about personal boundaries before he heard me talk about it on my other show. He had no idea what personal boundaries were. He just heard about it when he heard my show, and started realizing that he did not know how to enforce those boundaries in himself. And he had to learn. And he was easy on himself. He wasn't like, I didn't have boundaries all my life. I was a people pleaser all my life. But when you find that out, you have a chance to apply it. You have a chance to improve yourself. And so I want you to give yourself that chance. I want you to learn something that you know that you want to change about yourself, and give yourself that chance. Now, where empowerment comes in, where self-empowerment comes in, where you help yourself and you feel more power, you feel confident, you feel secure in yourself. Where that comes in is not only when you learn something new, but also when you apply it, and also applying it even though there's fear. So, that's personal growth 101. There's fear, so you dive into the fear and you do it anyway. You work through the fear by bringing that fear into your application of whatever you've learned, and suddenly you've gotten through it regardless of the fear. So when you get through it, now you have something else, another resource in your arsenal, or your toolbox, if you want to call it that. And when you have that resource in your toolbox, you know you can do it again. And I think what ends up happening in at least many relationships is that we are afraid of someone else's reaction or response. And most of the time, unless the person is violent or physically dangerous, which you have to determine, of course, but most of the time, people aren't physically dangerous. At least the relationships that are close in our lives. They're our intimate relationships, our close relationships, even family. Most of the time, for most people, I believe it's not physically dangerous. It can be, of course. So that's the caveat here. That's the disclaimer. Remember, everything you hear on this show is my opinion. And definitely seek out the advice of a medical or therapeutic professional. I forgot to say that at the beginning, but that's my disclaimer. So when I tell you these things and you're going to honor your boundaries and you're going to do whatever you want to do for yourself because it's the right thing to do, and the other person doesn't like that, then you might have repercussions. And that's where the fear comes in, right? You want to do something or say something to honor yourself. This is the right thing to do for you. This is what you're thinking and feeling. Yet when you do it, you know there'll be consequences. There'll be repercussions. In my other show, I talk about thinking about what you want to do and then doing it before the next thought of fear comes in. Just think about that. If you are going to face a challenging step in your life or a decision that you have to make, think about what you need to do, but don't include what you fear in that thought. And the good example I use in my Overwhelmed Brain show is that I had my stepfather show up at the front door while I was at my mom's house. I was actually living there after my divorce, and he wanted to come in. And if you've never heard the story of my stepfather, he is the source of much of my material because he is highly dysfunctional, alcoholic, abusive, on and on. When I was younger, and my mom had an abusive marriage for 40 plus years, a long time. So he shows up after they split up for a few months. He shows up and he wants to come in. And for the first time, I had a choice to make, or I felt like I finally had a choice to make. Because before, I would submit and say, oh, of course you can come in. I don't want to rock the boat. But in that moment, when he showed up and I opened the door, I didn't know he was there until I opened the door and saw his face. I had a choice to make. I actually gave myself this choice. You can do this. You can give yourself the choice instead of feeling powerless. You can give yourself the choice to make a different decision than you'd normally make because of the fear. And so what I want you to think about is when you are faced with the choice, don't think about the fear, not yet, because I know the fear has to do with the consequences and how people will respond and what will happen to you next. That's all a different thought. I want you to think about the very first thought, which is, what would I do if I had no fear of the consequences? That should be your first and only thought in this moment of decision, of challenge. What would be my decision? What would I do or say in this moment if I had no fear of the consequences? And then your mind kicks in and says, but there is something to be afraid of. There is fear because I could end up here and they could be mad and this could happen and that could happen. Absolutely. That's all true. I'm not taking all of that away from you. I wish I could, but I'm adding the resource of knowing you can have this thought. You can have a thought of, what would I do? I know you already have these thoughts, but what I'm helping you do is distinguish the difference between the thought, the action that you take from that thought, and the fear of the consequences from that action. I want you to distinguish those, separate them. Because when you make decisions based on the thought and the action, instead of based on the fear of the consequences, your life turns out completely different. You become happier. Your life gets easier. Is this always the case? Am I 100% correct? No, I'm not. Sometimes it gets harder. Sometimes there's more difficulties. People have written to me and said, you know what? I bit the bullet and I got a divorce. And I'm not just talking about divorce. I'm talking about any kind of challenging decision. But, this show is about difficult relationships. So relationship-wise, this is kind of in that context. People will write to me and say, I bit the bullet and I got the divorce, and now he or she is a big pain in the A. I won't say the word, but you know what I mean. They're a big pain. Every day I got to deal with them. And it's worse now that we're divorced, and it's worse because we have children together, and it's this and this and this. So that absolutely can and will happen with certain people. It will happen. It will become more difficult. And there are other challenges too. He or she controlled all the money. He or she controlled everything. I don't even know who to call to get cable or, telephone or electricity. I have to do everything myself. This is what I was afraid of. This is what I didn't want to face. I get that. I totally get it. And now that you have these new challenges, where are the old ones? Yes, but he or she is still bothering me and still in my life. I get that too. But do you have your own space now? These might be the questions I ask a client. Where are the specific challenges that you were dealing with? When you told me that when you came home, you were just waiting for the other shoe to drop and you were going to get yelled at, or you were going to be put down, you were going to be made to feel guilty. Somebody might say, well, a lot of that is gone, but every time I communicate with this person, it's still there. That happens. That absolutely happens. This is why they invent the no contact rule. This is why we use the gray rock technique. And if you haven't heard of those, no contact is basically blocking them at every possible level of communication that you can. So if you are sharing custody and they're calling you and they're texting you and they're leaving you voicemails, they're sending you messages through Facebook, all of these things are means of ways to contact you. Limit it to one and make your calls short and factual. Keep out your opinions, and this is where we merge the gray rock technique into this, which is basically become dull to them. Be full of life in the rest of your life, but be dull to them. Because, and this is important, the person that is very, very difficult to you, because they're coercive, controlling, manipulative, emotionally abusive, whatever it is, when they're toxic, when they're difficult, they wait for you to be in an emotional space. And then they feed off that emotion that you're having and loop it back to you in a way to make you feel worse. So if you're screaming at them because you're so upset at them, they know how to turn that into something that you're doing wrong and that you should feel guilty for and that you should change because you're so irrational. They will do that. You're having a perfectly legitimate emotional response. Anger, upset. You want to reach through the phone and choke them. That's what it feels like. But if you express that, if you express how angry you are with them or how insane that they're making you, they're going to make you feel insane. That's why gray rock is effective, because when you have emotions, that fuels the response they're going to have. Your emotion, your emotional state fuels their response. Even a happy emotional state. Hey, I'm having a great time since you've left. They might say something like, I can't believe you're in a good mood since you probably won't find anyone else in your life and you'll be alone for the rest of your life. And now our kid doesn't see one of his or her parents for half the week. Way to go, leaving me. That's what they do. They make you feel guilty. They're going to say things like this. And once that guilt kicks in, you need to turn into that gray rock. You need to be completely stoic. Not even stoic. Even stoicism contains emotional responses. You need to be bland. You just need to be bland and factual and quick. And then when they try to rile you up, you bring them into a dull, boring, gray void. Well, you said you were going to do this and now you're not doing it. And so a comment like that might be a way to try to rile you up. And what you need to do is be dull. Right. Well, you could say that. Right. I mean, that sounds boring. It sounds nondescript. And you might have a tendency to want to defend your position. Like, I didn't say I would do that, or I said I would do that on Saturday, which is our normal response with normal people. But you got to remember, you're probably not dealing with a normal person. You're probably dealing with someone who knows how to use your own responses against you. So this is why you need to limit your responses. This is why you need to dull yourself. Even when you're in a relationship. Like, I'm talking about somebody who might have written to me and said, I got a divorce and all this is happening. And I'm asking you, if you were that person, to be a gray rock, to cut them off as in every possible way with communication, except the most limited way, so that you have the least amount of contact with them. But even when you're in a relationship, what can happen is the same thing. I mean, that's what this show is mostly about, people in relationships that are experiencing a difficult time communicating. And that could be with your partner, that could be with family, like I started talking about in the beginning, trying to get through these family reunions or get-togethers, and everyone has different ideas of how you should live your life, how you should think, and maybe you have ideas of how they should think too, because it usually works, at least most of the time, both ways. Even if it's just a difference of opinion on how you should live your life, because you may want them to change their opinion about how you should live your life. So if you look at it in that way, you realize, I also want them to change. Yes, but it's only how they treat me. It's still asking them to change. So I'm not saying it's wrong to think that way. I'm saying what you convey to them could be just as defense-inducing, if I can say it that way. They might become just as defensive as you. They say, well, you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, or you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, and I have these ideals and I have these values, and they're totally against what you believe. Now you open up Pandora's box, and it's toxic. Now you have a toxic conversation. Unless one of you finally realizes that every time you point the finger at them and say you need to change, unless that happens, then that conversation continues to be toxic, and you end up with the same results every time you talk to this person. It's the same thing over and over again. I defend myself, they defend themselves. I say what they should think of me, and they say how I should live my life. And, this back and forth goes on and on and on. And what can you do? You can be that gray rock. You can try. Some people won't let you. Family is usually notorious for not letting you be yourself, or even not be yourself by just being quiet or unemotional, emotionally detached, at least during that time period. And you don't feel free to be yourself. So it can be easier to emotionally detach if you think about it that way. But I'm not even recommending you detach emotionally. I'm just recommending that you limit your highly charged emotional responses to people like this, to people that will take advantage of that and point the finger right back at you, make you feel bad, make you feel sorry that you said anything when they're good at it. Because unless you're good at staying with your values, your beliefs, your perceptions, and not backing down, and not having a problem being in that space, and not having a problem risking the relationship, unless you're in that space already, then you'll most likely find it more beneficial to learn how to respond differently than you have been. And what I mean by that is you can be your normal self, which is great, and honor yourself if you feel like doing that. But if it always leads to tension and stress, and you never get along and you want to get along, that's where you realize that one of you has to back down. And, my favorite way of backing down is simply asking questions. It's not submitting necessarily, unless they're just totally psychotic and they won't back down themselves and they just want you to feel miserable. I might just go, okay, you're right. Fine. You're right. No, everything you're saying is right. Everything is right. It's a little sarcastic. It's a little defeating because now I'm giving in when I don't want to give in. But at the same time, I don't want to finish the conversation. So I don't recommend that. I'm not saying that you should do that. But sometimes there are people like that. Like, no matter what you say, they're not going to be happy until you say they're right. So hopefully you don't have too many people like that in your life. And if you do, and you're hanging around them a lot, hopefully things will change. And whether you communicate with them differently, like we're talking about now, or maybe you're not supposed to be around them anymore because they're just not compatible with you. But a way to change communication is to be inquisitive and curious, because what this does is it puts them back in the driver's seat, but instead of pointing the finger at you, while they're in the driver's seat, they're pointing the finger at you saying, you're wrong, you're doing this wrong, you believe this wrong. Now the finger's pointing back at them, because you're asking questions. You're asking, really, you believe that? Why do you believe that? Why do you believe that I shouldn't work there? I'm just curious. And what is your goal in having me change? And then I would ask things like, well, why do you care so much about that? And, name me some examples of how you did that in your life. You can say that if you want. But it really is being fascinated and curious about their line of thinking. So I really love to turn the conversation around, make the other person, especially when they're toxic, the star. Put them up on the pedestal. Because what ends up happening is as you ask them questions, they're forced to give you reasons. Because they're going to feel good knowing that, hey, you're finally listening to me. And now they also feel like they have to be the authority. And in order to be the authority, they have to answer your questions. And if they have to answer your questions, they have to dig into their own psyche, their own experiences, their own intelligence, and come up with reasonable sounding answers. Come up with rational sounding answers. And as you ask questions, they're testing their limits. I mean, you're helping them test their limits, but they're testing their own limits because you know how it goes. Some people get so adamant about their opinion, they just want to spit it all over you. This and that and this and that, and they're pointing their finger at you. Yet, when you ask them to break it down into the details so that you can understand better, so that you can figure out their reasoning, their logic, not only may you learn something new about them, which is very helpful, and they'll also feel like, hey, you're finally listening to me. I feel understood. Maybe I won't attack you as much. That would be nice. Don't know if it'll happen, but sometimes that does. When they feel understood and listened to, they'll feel less attacking. And not only does that happen, but what also happens is putting them on the spot makes them feel like they really need to know what they're talking about. And if you've ever had an argument with someone who didn't really know what they were talking about and you knew it, then you're better off being inquisitive and fascinated and asking questions than just saying, well, you need to believe this and this is why, and I can't believe you don't believe this. Because once you're in that space and you get them emotionally charged, all they're doing is spitting back a bunch of surface level opinions and emotions and big picture things. You know, they're zooming way out, giving you a big picture, none of the details. Because as long as they can stay out of the details of their reasoning, of their logic, then they'll always win. Because they know how to incite your emotions. They know how to evoke them. And if you're in that emotionally charged space, they're going to be one step ahead and one step over you and pretty much pulling the strings of the entire conversation. So this is what happens with people like this, is when you get into these conversations or arguments with people that know how to pull your strings, you never win. Because you don't know they're pulling your strings. You don't know that they are capable of doing it. Or maybe you do, and you're trying to defeat them. But they're good at it. They've been practicing for years and years. And you are not that good. I'm not saying that you aren't good, but when it comes to conversing with someone like this or arguing with someone like this, they are better than you at doing what they do. So what you need to do is, instead of having a back and forth defense versus defense conversation, might be to give them the floor. All right, let me give you the floor. I mean, you wouldn't say this, you would think this. Let me give that person the floor. And now let me ask them questions as if they need to explain every little detail of how they came up with their logic. And I don't want you to do it sarcastically. I don't want you to do it in a patronizing way. Be curious. Be fascinated. Let them know that you are considering their words, if you want to go that far. That's what I do. I let them know that I'm carefully considering their words. I think what they said is important. It might have some validity, but I need to understand it more. Help me understand this more. Why do you think I should do this? And what you'll do again is find out the origin of their thoughts, or at least get closer to that origin. And so, like I said, if you're listening to this while attending gatherings or functions with family or people that you know are going to be toxic, and you get into these arguments, you get into these heated debates, you just want to remember the way it always goes will be the way it always goes unless you change. And they're not going to change. You just have to burn that into your brain. The person that you're dealing with that always makes the conversation difficult is never going to change. Hopefully they do, and I'm wrong. But this is why I said this earlier. Am I right about this? No, I'm not. Because sometimes what'll happen is people will change. People will shift. other people will stop and realize, oh, I'm hurting that other person, or I'm not really nurturing and fostering our relationship here. I'm trying to make it difficult for the other person. I just want to be right. But they are fully capable of changing just like everyone else. They are fully capable of making different decisions just like everyone else. I could be wrong about that too. They could have some disorder and maybe they aren't capable of empathy and caring and all that stuff. Quite possible. But I like to go into any situation knowing that the other person has a choice. And they are either choosing to be aggressive toward me, to be attacking toward me, or they're choosing to have their own thoughts, ideas, and opinions and perceptions and be okay with those and be okay that I have different ones. They're making that choice because there are people that can make the choice to say my way or the highway. I'm right, you're wrong, and the conversation with them will be difficult. They are capable of changing. They are capable of making different decisions. They're also capable of doing what I suggest, maybe, you could try, which is allowing them to have the floor. They're capable of doing that with you as well. And maybe by you allowing them to have the floor and you being inquisitive and fascinated and asking questions about how they came to those conclusions, maybe by you doing that, it'll rub off on them. And that would be nice. This doesn't work with the full-blown narcissist. I hate to tell you, the full-blown narcissist just wants to do everything their own way, and when it doesn't go their way, they control and manipulate so it does go their way, and they really don't have empathy. They really don't care what you want or what you need as long as it fulfills their needs. So you're not going to be able to do this with everyone. You might be able to get away with it for a little bit, like, oh, you're putting them on the pedestal. Oh, you're making them feel good about themselves. That can work. But they eventually realize, this isn't really going in my direction. I better change my strategy. That can happen. As you deal with a narcissist or a fully toxic person for a while, they catch on that they're not getting their needs met, and then they find a new way to do it. So this is why some relationships last longer than, anyone would predict, because the emotionally abusive or narcissist or a sociopathic person, they might be tricked for a little while. I shouldn't say tricked, but you might be able to get along with them for a little while, but then they find a new way to tackle the problem of not getting what they want. Because yes, you have been able to maybe adjust and adapt and figure out how to get through to them and get your needs met in certain ways, but then they make it more difficult again because they realize, I'm not really getting my needs met. It appears that I'm getting my needs met, but it's really not. And so they find deeper and darker and stranger ways to do it, or not really stranger, but just unique ways to do it. And so you got to be careful. If you're dealing with somebody like that who's always changing it up, always making it more difficult, relationships aren't supposed to be difficult. They're not really. They're supposed to be kind of working together to get to a better place for both of you. But when they're making it more and more difficult, and you're trying to make it easier, and you're trying to adapt and adjust, and they're just making it more difficult, then it's always going to be like that. That's the trend line that goes to the right and down slowly over time, showing loss quarter after quarter after quarter. You lose your emotional connection. You lose love. You lose happiness. You lose a lot as you stay in a relationship with someone who continues to make it harder. I'm pretty sure that most people that listen to this show don't want to make their relationship harder. Why would you? Why would you want to make it harder? Why does it have to be harder? When I have any trouble in my own relationship, the first thing I ask myself, or at least one of the thoughts that comes through my mind very early on, is how am I making this hard? And if I can come up with something legitimate, then I'll be humble. Then I'll think, okay, this is what I'm doing. I'm making it hard because I really want her to change, yet she doesn't want to. So maybe it's my demand that she changes that's making this harder. I mean, it took me a long time to get to that place where I can say something like that. It doesn't just come out easily. So anyone who's been emotionally abusive or toxic or is toxic now, it's very hard to come out of them, that kind of statement. But this is where it comes down to making the choice regardless of the fear. And I'm just going to close with this. I'll wrap it up. When you come to a place where you realize you have a choice to make, but the fear of what will happen is there, my first comment was to make sure that you have the thought and act on that thought and make the decision based on just that before the fear kicks in. Because as soon as the fear kicks in, that's when you can rationalize yourself out of it. That's when you can say, well, I can't do that because of this. And that's what keeps you where you are. And if you want to stay where you are, that's great. I'm not trying to talk you out of that. But if you want to change things, you might have to do things regardless of the fear. You might have to. And what that means is you take the leap of faith, hoping that you land on your feet. That's so scary because you may not. You may land in a black hole. You may land on the street. You may land somewhere else that you don't want to be. Yet I look at the comparison of what's been happening and how every day of my life I might have been walking on eggshells. And if I take this leap of faith, at least the eggshells are gone. That may or may not be comforting to you. But when I look at my life, in any situation that I had to walk on eggshells, my entire upbringing pretty much before I moved out of the house, I would take anything, homeless, jobless, moneyless, I've had almost all three, anything over that eggshell feeling. Because I don't want to live with that eggshell feeling. That's not living. That's not life. That's not how it's supposed to be. Relationships aren't supposed to be like that. So I want to get out of that regardless of where I land. I know that's scary advice. I know that could be dangerous advice. You could be in a dangerous situation. Remember the disclaimer. If you're around someone violent or dangerous, you don't want to necessarily just take the leap of faith and hope they understand and everything's going to work out. You might need help. You might need assistance. You might need to talk to someone. You might need to talk to a professional. So hopefully the people that are listening now aren't in severely abusive relationships, because if you are, that's a whole other level of taking care of yourself and doing the right thing, creating your escape plan, getting the authorities involved to plan your escape. Totally different level. I'm talking about the type of relationship where it just seems too difficult. Like, this shouldn't be this hard. They're not violent. They're not maybe aggressive, but why are they making this so hard? Why do I feel guilty after every conversation? Why do I feel like I'm failing? Why do I feel like everything I do is wrong? That's the kind of relationship I'm talking about. It's the type of relationship where you feel like that no matter what you do, you can never get it right. And if you feel that way and they don't, then you're not working together. It's not a relationship. It's one-sided. You have all the responsibility to change things, and they're getting away scot-free. That's not a partnership. That's not an equal, loving, supportive relationship. That is someone letting the other person do all the work. And if that's the case, you might have to do all the work, but don't do it for the relationship at that point. If they want you to do all the work and you need to change for them and they're happy, then they're not really in the relationship. They're kind of on the sidelines, trying to forge a relationship that only they're happy with. And if you adapt to their version of the relationship, what ends up happening is that you're unhappy while they're getting all their needs met. And again, it's still not a relationship. A relationship involves two people working at it together. And when the other person's unhappy and they're trying and nothing's working out, then it's up to the other person to go, hey, let's figure this out together. That's how it's supposed to work. I want to support us through this. I don't want to put that whole burden on you. Okay, so there are things going on in the relationship, and it's even okay for them to say, I think that what you're doing is causing all these problems. However, they should add that I'm open to looking at my behavior too. I'm open to that. That's what a relationship should be, no matter what type of relationship it is. You would hope that both people would be in a place to support the relationship as a whole, as if it were a separate entity. Hey, let's work on this thing together. Let's work on this project together. You do your part and I'll do my part. And then we'll try to make it work. And if one person says, I did my part, I've done everything I can, and I'm fine, everything looks great from my perspective, but the other person says, well, from my perspective, it's failing. This doesn't make me happy. It doesn't make me feel connected. It doesn't make me love you anymore, that's for sure. So there's a failure here. The other person should go, oh, you see a failure? Oh, I didn't see that. I missed it. All right, well, let's look at these failure points together and see what we can do. Instead, the toxic person says, well, that's just your perception. That's your belief. I see a great relationship. I don't even know how they can say that. How can anyone say that they see a great relationship when only 50% of it is working out for them? Because the other 50% isn't working out. Then the relationship as a whole isn't complete. It's not happening. It's not right because a part of it's wrong. That's like being in the back seat of a car. One side of the back seat is all clean, it's polished, and everything's shiny. And the other side of the back seat is dirty, and it's got a film over it, and it smells. And you're both occupying the same back seat, but one person says, everything looks fine to me. And then they look over at the other person and see that they're sitting in filth, and it smells, and they're unhappy. And they say, well, I guess you have stuff to fix over there because clearly you're having a problem. But since I'm not having a problem, there's nothing I need to do to help. There's nothing I need to do differently. Which isn't necessarily a problem in itself, because somebody might say that if they're not necessarily working together to have a great, in this example, back seat. If there are two different people that aren't necessarily in it together to create a wonderful back seat, then it doesn't matter. You can say things like that. Hey, that's your side. This is my side. This is how it goes. But when you sit in that back seat together, again, in this context, what you're saying is, hey, this entire back seat is mine just as much as it is yours. And because of that, I want you to be happy in your space, just like I want to be happy in my space. So if your space is dirty, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to help you clean it. I'm also going to make sure that there's nothing on my side causing this dirty seat or causing this film or causing this smell. I'm going to do whatever I can to help. And that's what I believe a relationship should be centered around, is seeing someone else's challenges and doing what you can to create a better life for them, to create the bigger picture, the bigger wholeness of a relationship, the bigger entity of what you're trying to build together. So there's a whole lot of avenues we can explore there, but I'm going to wrap it up with that. And just remember, when you make decisions that are based on what you really want for yourself, what you know is the right thing, your life does turn out better. It might get harder. You might take leaps of faith where you end up in situations that are much, much harder, but there is a gain in there. And the new challenge that comes from making those decisions also changes you, and those challenges decrease over time. And what I mean by that is the next time I have to face my stepfather or honor my personal boundaries with anyone, it's a lot easier because I got over that initial hump. If I had never gotten over that initial hump, then I would be living my life walking on eggshells for the entirety of my existence. And if that was the case, then what's the point? I don't want to walk on eggshells. I want to enjoy life. I want you to enjoy life. I want you to feel free to be yourself. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. If you want to pinpoint the exact behaviors causing difficulties in your relationship, including identifying all the signs of possible control, manipulation, or emotional abuse, head over to loveandabuse.com. This show reminds you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. Thanks for joining me today. We'll talk again soon.